Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into a really interesting and sometimes pretty heated debate. Are some of our modern ways of sharing the gospel, like altar calls, actually doing more harm than good? We're going to dig into what the theologian D.A. Carson has to say about all this. But first, let's start with this quote from the famous evangelist D.L. Moody. Someone was giving him a hard time about his methods, and this was his reply. It kind of perfectly frames the whole conversation, doesn't it? It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but actually finding ways to get a message across, well, that's a whole other story. All right, so this whole topic really kicked off when a student put a very direct question to D.A. Carson. But Carson's answer wasn't a simple yes or no. Instead, he used it to get at something much, much deeper. He showed that the debate over methods is often a symptom of a more fundamental problem. So here it is, the big question. Does asking people to come forward, to pray a prayer, to make a decision on the spot, does that get in the way of the gospel? Well, according to Carson, the method itself isn't really the hero or the villain here. The answer to that question? It completely depends on the situation. And this is really the heart of it. You see, we can argue all day about whether an altar call is good or bad, but that might be missing the point entirely. Carson says the real danger isn't asking for a response. The danger is asking for a response when the message has been watered down, when it's incomplete, or when you're talking to people who literally don't have the framework to understand what you're even saying. Okay, so why is this context so critical? Because if the content of the gospel is shallow, you risk doing what the old prophets warned against, healing my people slightly. You're basically putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. You make people feel better for a moment, but you haven't dealt with the real disease. And the world we live in today, well, it makes that danger bigger than ever before. Think about it. If you press someone for a decision, but you haven't explained these core ideas, what are they actually saying yes to? Without understanding sin, the cross is just a brutal, pointless execution. Without the idea of substitution, it's a tragedy, not a triumph. You end up with a faith that might feel sincere, but it's built on sand. So what's the biggest change, the most important piece of context that shifted from, say, Moody's time to ours? It's this: massive, widespread biblical illiteracy. 100 years ago, a speaker could pretty safely assume most people in the room had a basic grasp of the Bible's storyline and its vocabulary. Today, Carson argues you can't assume anything. I mean, nothing. Let's take a really famous example. This verse from the Gospel of John. It's used all the time in evangelism. It promises an abundant life. And, who doesn't want that? It sounds fantastic, right? But what do those words actually mean to someone hearing them cold? Here's the catch. Those same words can paint two totally different pictures in someone's head, and the picture they see depends entirely on the world they live in and the ideas they bring to the table. And this just nails the communication gap. A first-century listener hearing this in a world of shepherds and sheep would hear a promise of safety, provision, and flourishing under a good shepherd's care. But a modern listener, they're much more likely to hear a promise of personal fulfillment, a better job, a hotter love life, more happiness. They're just not hearing the same thing at all. I mean, Carson's point is that for many people today, their only image of Moses is Charlton Heston. They might not even know the Bible has a New and Old Testament. So to ask someone like that to make a life or death commitment based on words they completely misunderstand, it's not just a bad strategy, it's foolish. You have to put in the work to build the framework first. Okay, so this brings us to a really fundamental principle of all communication, really. Before you can ever get someone to agree on the solution, the good news, you absolutely have to get them to agree on what the problem is in the first place. Just think about it for a second. If you think your biggest problem is just that you're lonely, what you need is a good therapist, not a savior. If you think the world's biggest problem is economic injustice, you need a new political party. The solution only makes sense when you've correctly diagnosed the disease. So what does the Bible say the root problem is? The one behind all the other problems? It calls it sin, which isn't just about breaking some rules.
It's this deep alienation from God. It's transgression, it's idolatry. It's this act of dethroning our Creator and sticking something, or someone, usually ourselves, in his place.
So how in the world do you help someone see this problem? Well, a classic way is by laying out the law, God's perfect, holy standards. When people really hear the command to love God with their entire being and to love their neighbor as much as they love themselves, it becomes pretty clear, pretty fast that none of us measure up. And falling short has serious consequences. The Bible talks about the wrath of God. I mean, we're talking over 600 times just in the Old Testament. And this isn't God just losing his temper. It's presented as his settled, determined, and just opposition to evil and rebellion. And understanding that, understanding the bad news, is exactly what makes the good news of grace so absolutely stunning.
Okay, so if we agree that establishing the problem is the absolute key, how do you do it? Well, let's look at two really powerful approaches that take the same core principle but adapt it for two very different kinds of audiences. Let's go back to the 18th century. John Wesley had this very methodical approach. He would preach God's law and then preach some more law until people really felt the weight of it, until they were convicted that they were lost. It was only then, when they could see how desperate their situation was, that he'd start to bring in the good news of grace. Okay, now let's fast forward to a completely different universe, modern-day Manhattan. Pastor Tim Keller, working there, found that for his audience, a very postmodern, biblically illiterate crowd, starting with the law just didn't connect. To them, it just sounded like some arbitrary, angry being making up a bunch of rules. And here's the brilliant adaptation. Instead of starting with breaking the rules, Keller would often start with idolatry. He would frame sin less as trespassing and more as betrayal, betraying the relationship you are made to have with your Creator. Because in a culture that might not care about ancient rules, but deeply understands the pain of a broken relationship, that idea hits home. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, these are just two different doors leading into the exact same room. Because if you think about it, betraying God is transgressing his law. And transgressing his law is a form of betrayal. They're two sides of the very same coin. Which brings us full circle, right back to where we started. What's the real danger we need to worry about? What's the thing we should be focused on when we talk about sharing our faith? It's not the method, it's the message. The single greatest danger is rushing to talk about a solution before people have any clue how serious the problem is. When we present grace without talking about sin and the law and the holiness of God, we end up offering a cheap, shrunken, and diminished gospel. So we'll just leave you with this final question to think about. For the good news to be truly good, for it to be glorious and life-changing, it has to be the answer to truly terrible news. Does the gospel you've heard, or the one you share, start with the bad news first?